Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The more people that are joining at the moment, but they can keep coming in, but we better make a start so that we can try and fit in everything that we plan to share with you today. So good afternoon. For those who don't know me, I'm Oliver Lancaster, IGEM's Chief Executive, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's Industrial Affiliates event covering an introduction and update on the Gas Goes Green programme, which IGEM supports on the advisory group, and also updating you on the work we and our valuable volunteers are doing in the hydrogen space. You may have noticed that your microphone is automatically muted and your video switched off. This is on purpose in order to help the session to run smoothly. We're also recording the session today and we'll be making it available on IGEM TV, and we'll also circulate a link to it afterwards to all attendees. It's exciting for me to see so many names that are familiar popping up, joining the call, but also I'm aware of the number of businesses who are joining and representing different organisations for the gas sector, and others as well who've joined us to find out more about what the gas sector is doing to shift to net zero. We've got local authorities, housing associations, energy suppliers, appliance and equipment manufacturers, gas networks, and many, many more on the call. So thank you very much for joining us. I can't pick everyone out, but it's actually worth a nod to a couple of the groups on the call that we haven't seen before, not in large numbers anyway. We've noticed the social housing sector are showing increasing interest in decarbonised gas, especially hydrogen, as an option to achieve net zero across their stock, after much focus over the last decade or so on the depth of fabric retrofit, rooftop solar PV and electrification. Social housing partners have been joining IGEM as industrial affiliates and are engaging with us on technical safety skills and now net zero. And we're delighted to be supporting you, and we would of course warmly welcome many more. It's also great to see energy suppliers, which is a difficult place at the moment, I think you'd agree, but who are looking ahead at developing things like tariff structures for supplying hydrogen to homes in the same world as dynamic pricing of electricity as part of an energy service package. But first, a little bit more context before I hand over to the speakers. Here we are, nudging the back end of 2021 already, and it's now a whole year since the Prime Minister's 10-point plan was launched, which, along with other strategy documents, will be touched on later on. I don't think there's any better time to be working in energy and the gas sector as the transition to net zero ramps up and the end-to-end supply chain of the gas sector is brought into the spotlight to deliver from production and storage through networks to a range of demand sectors, with much of the enabling activity needed from many organisations such as those on this call. Key parts to play all along the way to 2050, but with a huge amount to do this decade. We're a sector, though, with a long history of innovation and transformation in the face of challenge and opportunity, including, would you believe, from the very early days, transferring from whale gas to coal gas, where there was that competition, delivering local hubs of bundled services for heat, light, power and coke. So bundled services aren't such a new thing. Going from coal gas to oil gas, taking supplies from different sources like coal mines and coking works, as well as LNG. Moving from open flame to more efficient gas mantle lighting, developing household products to use gas that were sold in showrooms, including, would you believe, gas-fired hairdryers, fridges and baths. And of course, transitioning to natural gas with a gargantuan conversion programme that Sir Dennis Rook referred to as the largest peacetime operation in our nation's history. And now more recently, we've already had fantastic progress with introducing biomethane and now hydrogen. But getting to net zero with the lowest cumulative emissions at lowest total system cost will take some coordination and optimization. And that involves a balance of investment across building fabric, building technology, gas and electricity networks, generation, production, and energy storage. Its coordination is needed across the whole gas supply chain and continued delivery of our trend of innovation. So before I introduce the speakers, just to let you know that questions for both speakers will be taken after both presentations have been delivered. Please do pop them in the chat as we go along, and I'll look through them and ask them on your behalf as time allows. And if we don't get the chance to ask all the questions, I'm really sorry, but we'll do our best afterwards to follow up with the answers that you haven't been able to get. Now, all that remains for me is to hand over to our first speaker today, Dr. Tom Koller, Head of Gas Goes Green at the Energy Networks Association. Gas Goes Green is the gas network blueprint to meet the challenges and opportunities of climate change, delivering net zero in the most cost-effective and least disruptive way possible. He represents the ENA, whose transmission and distribution network members own and operate the pipes and wires for transporting gas and electricity in the UK and Ireland. And Tom previously worked on green gas and energy policy in the biomethane sector. So Tom, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Ollie and IGEM, for the invitation to join you all today. Gas Goes Green is a flagship programme of the Energy Networks Association. As Ollie said, the ENA is the representative body of gas and electricity networks across the UK and Ireland, and our Gas Goes Green programme really constitutes the gas network's shared view of how we can support the UK's net zero emissions obligations. It's a programme through which we are delivering the evidence that's required to enable government, regulators and industry to make decisions on the future of energy. And it's a programme through which we are bringing innovation to the energy industry. So be it pioneering engineering research to test and trial new gases in network assets, or in terms of innovative and new thinking on policy and regulation that's required to usher in net zero. In our ENA and now our members work very closely with IGEM, including, as Ollie mentioned, through IGEM's participation in the Gas Goes Green Advisory Group, and certainly value this relationship and the expertise of the IGEM team and the input of IGEM members and affiliates. I actually think it's through working together as a gas community that we will achieve the Gas Goes Green vision, or something like that, where green gases play an important role in the UK meeting the challenge of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So really pleased to see such great attendance today, and I think such conversations are really important going forward. If we go on to the next slide, please. Today we're going to discuss the progress on the Gas Goes Green roadmap to net zero, and I'll start by setting out our view of the balanced energy system that we see as being required to deliver net zero. I'll then say a little bit about the latest government policies fundamental to enabling and encouraging the energy transition that we've begun. And it's really against this policy landscape that I'll then set out and say a little bit about how we're progressing with our plan to deliver the transformation. So if we go on to the next slide, and the next one again. This illustrative chart that you can see on the screen here, it shows how our ambition as gas network companies, and I refer to ENA's members of Cadent, of National Grid, of Northern Gas Networks, of Wales and West Utilities, and of SGN, and of independent gas transporters. The ambition we have really requires a fundamental change, as you can see on the chart here, in the composition of the gas that's transported and distributed through the networks. It's going to require a change in the natural gas received today to an increase in biomethane and hydrogen. And Ollie actually used the word balanced a couple of times in his introduction, and certainly that's our view of what's required. And the modelling actually that underpins our vision is what we term a balanced energy system model. It's balanced because it requires a number of different energy sources to achieve net zero across buildings, industry, power and transport sectors, and doing this at lowest total system cost. Our view of a balanced approach has a considerable role for low carbon and renewable gases, and these are used in balanced combination with low carbon electricity, with CCUS, with substantial energy efficiency measures being introduced. And as you can see from the profile of the chart and where we are in terms of the time horizon, there is a lot of progress still to be made. Our pathway does require a really rapid scale up in the amount of biomethane, the volumes of biomethane and hydrogen that are required. And there will be different technologies and energy carriers along with biomethane and hydrogen to support different sectors of the economy in their own decarbonisation journeys. So the transport sector, for example, certainly seems on course to replace diesel and petrol passenger vehicles with electric vehicles, and probably looking like a combination of hydrogen fuel cells and electric powertrain for the heavier goods market. Biomass is set to become a prized commodity and may be the most suitable means of reducing emissions in the aviation sector. And there's similar sort of stories and becoming clearer, at least to some extent, in the other sectors. For buildings, households, commercial buildings, ENA is of the view that a mix of low carbon technologies will be what's needed to decarbonise their heat. And this is really important for ensuring that consumers have a choice of low carbon options and get to exercise that choice. And the last thing to highlight on this chart is the pathway, and you can see this set out in time chunks at the top of the chart. And this is the Gasco's Green roadmap for delivering net zero. And there's a lot of information that sits behind this. But today I really want to focus on the first few steps, really the next decade that those of you who followed the climate conference has been identified as a really crucial decade. For the gas networks, we think this means preparing for the transition and connecting more green gas. And that's what I want to focus on today. If we move on to the next slide, and the next slide. So it's against that background of potential pathways for the energy transition that over the last year we've received a number of government strategies and position papers, and these will provide the foundations on which we'll build this transformative agenda. So I wanted to highlight a couple of key updates. So as Ollie mentioned, a year ago the Prime Minister released the 10-point plan. In this, government committed to realising 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030, and for 1 gigawatts of this capacity to be online by 2025. Responding to network plans, government also put forward its hydrogen in homes strategy, and this could be seen as having two parts. One in relation to a hydrogen blend to introduce or to complete the testing necessary to introduce a hydrogen blend of up to 20% volume by 2023 into the gas distribution grid. And a second part of this hydrogen and home strategy to begin a really comprehensive and world-leading trials program of 100% hydrogen being received and used by households. So the first element of this is to have a 100% neighbourhood trial up and running by 2023. And this is being run by SGN through the H100 programme. And then this and the successes and learnings from this will be built on further with a large village hydrogen 100% trial in 2025, and then possibly a hydrogen town in 2030. Innovation was also signalled in the PM's 10-point plan, and a £1 billion net zero innovation portfolio pot was created to help deliver the PM's vision. And bioenergy and hydrogen was certainly signalled as priority areas within that. If we move on, the next slide has some of the key takeaways from the Energy White Paper that we saw at the end of last year. The only one I'll say a little about is the business models for hydrogen production. This set out that these will be finalised in 2022, and in the intervening months between the white paper and now, there has since been a consultation on the proposed contracts for difference approach that's favoured by government. On the next slide, if we can move on, we have had more recently the UK's hydrogen strategy. And I think overall, reflecting on that, there was much in that was worth the wait. and I think all parts of the energy industry now can have confidence that hydrogen will be a part of the future energy mix at least to some degree. We have a very clear date by which government wants to make a decision on hydrogen blends, as I mentioned, and a value for money case is underway within BEIS already. And on 100% heating, 100% hydrogen for heating, we know from the strategy that a decision will be made by 2026 on the extent to which hydrogen will be the dominant means of heating homes up and down the country, or whether alternative options will be the dominant means. And as I mentioned, we've got the clear timeline for trials of 100% hydrogen. We move on again. The most recent policy development has been the heat and building strategy. And this unveiled a £450 million boiler upgrade scheme, providing capital grants to support heat pump uptake. It also kicked off a consultation to propose an obligation on manufacturers who sell fossil fuel heating appliances, proposing an obligation to for them to grow the number of heat pump installations that they do, in line and to support the government's trajectory of reaching 600,000 heat pump installations per year by 2028. The strategy also brought us the government's aim to phase out installation of new gas boilers by 2035. And I think it's important to see this as an aim, not a commitment. And as I'll come on to, this could form part of a conversion of hydrogen heating of homes. So moving on to the next slide, please, Kevin. The strategy and policy landscape that I set out, it's really against that I see it appropriate to track the progress that we are making. As I mentioned earlier, our shared pathway has 2 steps that we're working on at the moment, or for the next 5 years or so, and those are to prepare for the transition and to facilitate green gas connections. We move on to the next slide. The networks have already supported the connection of 109 biomethane plants under the Renewable Heat Incentive, and there are many more sites being developed that will connect under the new Green Gas Support Scheme that launched last week. For E&A and the networks part, we have established an entry customer forum, an entry connection forum, really, to help improve the connections process. And this forum has membership right across the industry with network and green gas producers and equipment manufacturers to bring them all together to identify necessary changes that we can make to simplify and quicken the connection process, really remove all blockers to entry. And if we move on, the other part of our focus is on planning. And there's a couple points here that I want to mention before concluding. At the start of the year, we published our hydrogen network plan. As you can see from the graphic here, this is our plan to support hydrogen right across the economy, do what's necessary at the networks to enable that economy to grow. And our plan has 4 stages, as you can see on the slide here. Those are to prepare for the transition, to introduce solution pilots, to scale up the transition, and then to accelerate that transition. And on the next slide, I'll say a little bit more about how this develops, talk you through this graphic here. So in the first stage, moving from left to right, really over the next 5 years, the networks will be undergoing this preparation and strategic development. The networks will be continuing with the Iron Mains risk reduction programme to replace old pipes in the ground today with new polyethylene pipes, these being ready for hydrogen. We know that the networks will need to complete the safety case for hydrogen and, as I said, undergo that programme of trialling hydrogen in homes. And it's from this first stage of work that the government will have the information required to make the policy decisions it needs to on the conversion of the networks and on that long-term role of gas in UK energy. In the second stage, from around 2025 to 2030, the networks will be carrying out these important pilots. The blends of hydrogen into the network of up to 20% volume, these will roll out right across the network. And also at this time, the current billing regime will have to change so that energy is billed on the basis of energy content rather than on volume. Then in the early 2030s, this scale up that I mentioned will commence. Hydrogen pipelines that have been built to facilitate industrial clusters will begin to join up with one another, and the Iron Mains replacement programme will conclude. Following pilots and the learning we've got from that programme of trials, the first areas of the country during these early 2030s will convert to 100% hydrogen. And as this hydrogen network then grows, industry that isn't in those industrial clusters can be joined up. And then we're into the 2040s where really the full transition will occur and a national hydrogen network is built out, and the transformation is part of the safe practice and training of gas safe engineers. So on the next slide, I won't go through all the changes, but wanted to identify and note that we are cognizant that changes will need to take place in homes. Crucially though, and I think this is a key argument for hydrogen against other options, these changes won't be noticed. And that's something that we need to confront and be prepared to talk about. On the next slide, I wanted to set out that the transformation I've just described is one where the networks or parts of them convert to 100% hydrogen. But as mentioned, considerable work has taken place and work is underway to introduce a blend of hydrogen into the network. And this might actually prove to be the first experience of many up and down the country of receiving hydrogen and understanding what hydrogen is as an energy source. Network projects, including HyDeploy, which many of you on the line will have heard of, these have trialed and tested blends of up to 20% hydrogen volume, and work that we should release next week will set out possible timelines of legislative and regulatory changes that might allow hydrogen blending to meet the government's 2023 deadline. We're currently working on 2 or 3 different approaches, whether to follow a blending regime that seems very similar to how biomethane is today, or whether a more strategic sort of key locations approach could be taken to introduce more volumes, higher volumes of hydrogen in certain places, with the networks managing where those blends go. So we need to set out, do some more thinking on these, and certainly test those with people and draw in lots of views. So we'll need to do more on these questions and aim to have these detailed studies done next year in time for the government to make its value for money case, but also in time to give industry and users of that blend sufficient notice and address any concerns they might have. So my final slide is just to say that Gas Goes Green is united on in our roadmap to 2050, to net zero. But of course, it's the gas network projects that really sit underneath and underpin the gas network's shared Gas Goes Green programme. I won't mention each of these projects as I'm conscious of time, and there are indeed many more projects listed on the next slide and to go in addition to these projects, but I wanted to share these to give a flavour of the sort of work taking place, engineering learning that's providing the basis for the strategic view that was set out in Gas Goes Green. So that's my update on the progress we're making to date on building a net zero network. Hope that's been of interest and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Tom, for that. As I said before, we'll move towards the next presentation now and have questions afterwards. Now over to Ian McCluskey, Head of Technical and Policy at IGEM, who is responsible for all the production of our technical standards and related activities, including research, record management, training, and liaising with industry and external stakeholders. No doubt many of you will know Ian. He's Director for the Gas Industry Safety Group, member of the All-Party Parliamentary Carbon Monoxide Group, and steering group member for the Decarbonised Gas Alliance. You saw the slide just a moment ago. He also oversees the management and governance of the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre, working with IGEM's Technical Coordinating Committee and Hydrogen Committee to ensure that the robust policies and processes are in place to maintain a high-quality repository of hydrogen resources. Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many on the call today as well. Thanks, Ollie, for that introduction. During this session, what I really want to set out is some of the work that IGEM are doing and IGEM's members, covering critical areas of policy and support standards that we're creating to help the transition, but importantly, focused on the Glasgow's Green Roadmap to net zero. So on the slide in front of you, just wanted to run through a little bit of an introduction. I suspect there may be a few of you on here who may not be familiar with IGEM's work and how we work as an institution. So I'll just go through some of that kind of process of IGEM by way of an introduction. And that leads nicely into a lot of the work in terms of engagement with our key stakeholders and critical stakeholders working within IGEM's committees and also the working groups as well. And I'll outline some of those key groups that are helping us to deliver the key information that we need to move forward, particularly when it comes to standards and for policy. And looking at policy, I'll cover some of the work that we are doing, providing that independent and respected voice and source of advice for policymakers as well. Including on that, we'll touch on our very first Engineering a Sustainable Gas Future paper, which we've just published, and also to the Royal Academy of Engineering's National Engineering Policy Centre, another critical stakeholder when it comes to setting policy for net zero. Now, on the standards activity, I want to just briefly touch on some of the standards work that we're doing, in particular looking at some of the key projects that we've been working with our key stakeholders incredibly hard, looking at the projects involved in the upstream standards and high technical, the BASE programme looking at skills and standards in the downstream sector, but also looking at a standard for hydrogen gas quality in the UK, and also the wider gas quality standard as well that we all know that's enshrined in GSMR. I'll touch on the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre, some key stats in there as well, and then I'll look ahead to some of the policies and standards that we've got coming up. Next slide, please, Kevin. So just by way to help shape this discussion, to help maybe those members of the audience who are not familiar with IGEM and may certainly be outside the UK, probably best describe who IGEM is and what we do and how we do it. And by way of sort of history, we are founded in 1863 and obtained a Royal Charter in 1929, and that gave the institution a greater recognition of a status of a body representative of the profession of gas engineering, helping it to more fully achieve its aims in developing gas science and the highest standards of professional conduct among its members, and for the wider, greater public benefit at large. We're independent of government, and that's quite critical, and we're a not-for-profit organisation, which is also quite critical as well, and not an industry trade body. Now, these attributes mean that our actions are based on the expertise of our members, and our reputation is based solely on professionalism, so allowing us to act as a trusted source of advice and technical information and technical services for the gas sector. Now, we achieve this by promoting the highest attainment of highest standards of professional competence, including maintaining a register of qualifying engineers assessed against those competencies, providing high quality knowledge and products and services for the professional development, but identifying and improving gas policy in cooperation with technical stakeholders, including producing a range of technical standards and publications recognised globally and in the UK by the Health and Safety Executive. We work across sector, everything from high pressure gas transmission right through to the burner and everything in between. And in today's net zero context, we're absolutely passionate about engineering that sustainable gas future. And it's essential for IGEM to deliver on our public benefit goals, and we take note that these public benefit goals means that it's essential that for the sector to decarbonise, it must do it in a way which is providing a just transition. That's one which is affordable, accessible and safely delivered to consumers. Next slide, please, Kevin. So how do we do this? Now, I don't want to touch on some of IGEM's committees and incredible work that, and the technical groups that we have and the support we get from our members in doing so. There's a number of committees and working groups that we're dealing with, but in particular, I want to touch on the Gas Quality Working Group, which is chaired by Gus McIntosh from SGN, from the gas networks in Scotland and the South. And I'll talk more on the gas quality standard later on. The Hydrogen Quality Committee, chaired by Keith Owen from Northern Gas Networks. And if you can just go to the next slide, Kevin. This sort of demonstrates the breadth of experience and expertise that the committee is bringing to the discussion and to the development today, helping to shape the standards and policies that I'm going to be touching on in a second. So everything from the gas networks all the way through to downstream expertise in appliances and equipment, scientists and academic institutions, as well as research companies. Important to integrate with the work going on in Europe, so European organisations and other organisations who are working, creating standards as well. Next slide, please, Kevin. So turning to some of the policy, and on screen you've seen some of the policy announcements and strategies, a lot of which Tom's already sort of outlined in his presentation as well, and where we've responded and provided an IGEM view to. There's also been a number of recent consultations which IGEM's provided the responses to, such as that Future Buildings Standards and the Scottish Heating Building Standards as well. But I want to just touch on some new publications which you may have seen. And so quite recently we've published our first in a series of policy papers, the Engineering a Sustainable Gas Future. I want to say a big shout out and a big thank you to our policy manager, Sarah Ellis Mannings, who's helped bring all this together. And in there, we present how IGEM and our members and the engineering community as a whole are at the forefront of making a sustainable gas future a reality. Now, IGEM is dedicated to supporting them to achieve this. The intrinsic value of IGEM as a professional engineering institution lies embedded within its membership to provide opportunities for UK-based and international members to come together, share knowledge, debate and learn from the cutting-edge developments around the world. Now, our individual and company members are actively working together and with partners across the academic, scientific and wider engineering community to understand how gas can contribute to a clean energy future. And you've heard from Tom, although it was very brief, the touching on the projects that are underway, looking at the hydrogen feasibility, delivering the safety results and the information that's forming the vital evidence base in the case for future gas policies and the development of the decarbonised gas networks. Now, turning to the other reports that you can see on the screen, IGEM is also a member of the Royal Academy of Engineering and the National Engineering Policy Centre, which connects policymakers with critical engineering expertise to inform and to respond to policy issues of national importance, giving policymakers a route to advice from across the whole profession, presenting a unified voice on shared challenges. In the centre is an ambitious partnership between 43 different UK engineering organisations, representing some 450,000 engineers. Now, two recent reports which IGEM contributed to were, first one, there's the Rapid Low Regrets Decision Making for Net Zero Policy. Now, this report describes how the UK's ability to decarbonise at sufficient speed and scale is dependent on key decisions being made by the government now, and is the pathway that Tom's identified as well, and in the years that immediately follow. So with less than 30 years until the UK must meet its targets for net zero carbon emissions, it's absolutely vital that policymakers are able to make confident decisions in the face of uncertainty, identifying priority actions that can be taken today to put the UK on a pathway to net zero by 2050. Now, these decisions must be made across multiple policy areas that need to be worked together as a system to achieve net zero in the most efficient and effective way. And given the shortages of timescales, and the timescales are incredibly tight, decisions need to be made before uncertainties are fully resolved. Now, recognising that need, for urgent action. The low-to-rich framework presented in this report has been developed to help policymakers identify and build confidence in decisions that can be taken now to decarbonise the UK economy. And one example of an important low-to-rich decision that can be taken now is the deployment of critical technologies such as hydrogen with carbon capture and storage. The other paper is the 6 engineering ambitions for the UK spending review. Now that we set out the 6 priorities for investment in this year's spending review that's necessary for the government is to deliver its ambitions to build back better. One such example is for the government to urgently invest in an ambitious net zero skills plan that will enable rapid and affordable reskilling and upskilling opportunities for existing workforce to meet the short-term skills needs for the transition to net zero, as well as the longer-term skills needs as well. There's a link on the bottom there for the website where you can click on that and you can see further details on those reports I've just highlighted. I thoroughly recommend it. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, turning to the ambitious work that we've been undertaking, looking at the standards that we're writing here, which is enabling the transition, I'm going to talk about the High Technical Project, which was a project jointly funded between IGEM and the UK Gas Networks, including National Grid. Now, it covered the literature and science review with subsequent revision to technical standards for hydrogen pipelines. The scope of the project is to research and produce supplements and documents related to the safe transmission and distribution of hydrogen blends. Now, with the work undertaken by subject matter experts who will research the requirements for the IGEM standards TD1, 3, 4, 13 and SR25 to enable the change of use of existing natural gas networks and the design of new and construction of new assets for the transportation of hydrogen and blends as well. Now, the work we've broken down into 4 work streams. I'll just briefly touch on those you can see on the screen. So work stream 1 deals with some key reports that we've published, looking at the assessment of operational issues for pressure-rich installations and other installations for hydrogen and hydrogen blends. There's a report available on that. The assessment and inspection, maintenance, repair techniques. What's going to be different now when you're looking at new hydrogen and hydrogen blend pipelines and assets. Another report on that one. Some of the safety aspects we worked on was the building proximity distances and QRA, impact assessment on parallel pipelines that are related to TD1. And those reports are all available on the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre. Workstream 2 was the development of supplements that we touched on, and we've published 2 of those already. So TD1 for high pressure pipelines for blends of hydrogen has been published. TD13 below 7, above 7 bar has also been published for pressure regulating installations. And we have currently ready to publish for industry comments, so you see these available. An important part of the governance process is TD13, TD below 7 bar, TD3 and 4 for steel and PE distribution and service pipelines. So those reports are available and the documents are available on the IGEM website. Next slide, please, Kevin. The next 2 work streams was looking at hazardous area assessments. So SR25, for those that are familiar with it, is an existing assessment for hazardous areas for gas installations. We're close to publishing a new supplement to that. You'll see there's been a report, phases of it. Phase 1 was to be just a report looking at the suitability of these approaches, not just within IGEM, but other standards that are used, but also looking at producing a new supplement. And there's an incredible work being done by the Health and Safety Executive and DNV producing these reports, and there's a supplement about to be made available for industry comment. We also done some work on SR23 and producing a report through DNV looking at the review of thermal radiation and noise for hydrogen venting. And that report has been published and is available on the IGEM website on the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, turning to the downstream activity, here IGEM is developing new standards that will be providing the technical requirements for engineers to be trained to facilitate the occupied trials for hydrogen. Tom mentioned is going to be happening in Fife. IGEM set up a small working group with technical expertise to lead the development of these technical standards. And we'll work with Energy and Utility Skills, key partner in the provision of the essential training and assessment specifications that will be used to train the engineers for these trials. Next slide, please, Kevin. There are 5 deliverables that we have. We've broken them down into 3 kind of key phases. Phase 1 is the assessment of the gaps, making sure that we've assessed the gaps in the knowledge that we currently have through the standards that we published already. We know what those gaps are, and those help to shape and inform 5 work packages and research packages that BEIS have undertaken and currently are out with providers working in research and development to close the gaps down that we've identified. So we've already carried out and we'll be working with, as those gaps get closed, parts of the research to close the gaps. We're going to, for example, on purging and testing low pressure installations for hydrogen. So that's the phase 1 part. Phase 2 is around the development of these new standards. Now, we've already produced IGEM H1, the reference standard. That is the basic scientific and knowledge and understanding of what's different from hydrogen, particularly through a lens of looking at it from their effect on materials, on measurement, on purging and testing, and on equipment and jointing and methods as well. So it provided that scientific evidence base, and we'll update that through another lens of a non-domestic process as well. So the new version of that will be publishing next year. Now H2 is, IGEM H2 is a standard for low pressure domestic. We'd already produced an interim standard which recognised a lot of the gaps that I just touched on. So we'll update that through next year, working with the research companies who are closing those gaps down, so we can then produce a document with more requirements in there, so the gaps have now been closed down. Big effort though is actually will be in element 4 there, which is the H3, which is going to be a new non-domestic standard, very much in the framework as the domestic, but it will comprise more elements of pipe work, as we know within a UP2 environment, so larger pipe work, particularly different materials being used in that sector feeding larger installations, UP1 testing and purging, looking at hazardous area assessment as well for in the commercial environment, and also the metering installations as well, as working with those equipment manufacturers and appliances in that space as well. So we're producing a new enabling standard for non-domestic, like commercial installations. And phase 3 is to support the development of the training specifications from these technical standards that are being published. Next slide, please, Kevin. I just want to touch on hydrogen quality here. It's a critical standard that we will need, which takes into account a lot of the work, an understanding for a safe distribution of hydrogen in the network, particularly through a lens of either new or even repurposed network as well. Taking account of the different production techniques, taking account of the purity and the odorization techniques as well. Looking at the transmission and distribution system and including storage as well. The effect on applications, so what's going to be critical to ensure the safe combustion and operation, including transport, and of course critical will be the safety aspects, particularly as it's used by end users as well. We're currently working with a group set up through the Hydrogen Committee. We're at a second working draft of that document, which is outlining the key parameters for the specification. Next slide, please, Kevin. Now, turning to gas quality wider, a proposed new IGEM gas quality standard, which is seen as a key step in this pathway to net zero. The gas quality working group was formed with the purpose of creating a standard covering the UK gas quality specification in support of duty holders required to demonstrate compliance with GSMR, because we know it's enshrined in Schedule 3 in the UK. The standard has been published against the backdrop that we've done, the backdrop of declining supplies in the North Sea, more reliance on imported sources as well from both LNG and the interconnector. Quite important as well is the need to decarbonise the energy system. So next slide, please, Kevin. So just some of the parameters on there, the key changes, just as a reminder of what we've published here. The oxygen content normalised to 1%. It's currently, although there's a class exemption, but it's currently 0.2. The water limits are now extended to 52, proposed to 52.85 megajoules per cubic metre, and a new lowering of the bottom end to 46.5, so a wider range of gases. We've removed those interrelated safety factors of the incomplete combustion factor And the next slide, please, Kevin. The shooting index, and we proposed a new dimension where the will-be index is inferred through relative density as well, 0.7, no greater than. Because we've now used emergency limits as the normal limits, there's no need for another part which dealt particularly the Part 2 requirements to deal with emergency arrangements. That's currently in proposal. Now, next slide, please, Kevin. The Gas Quality Working Group sort of recognises that the wide support for incorporation of hydrogen into the new standard, and we discussed that, and we discussed that hydrogen we know is going to play a key and critical role in the decarbonisation moving forward. But at this time, you know, the evidence base needs to be fully developed, and once we've got that fully developed, it will then be incorporated into the new standard. So we'll get the standard published. We've now got a dynamic and framework for further changes when the case for hydrogen becomes developed. It's important to remember as well, I don't know if you can do the next slide, please. That's right. It's important to remember that GSMR, the regulation which will need to be changed following the agreed proposals should they get finalised, that GSMR was primarily intended to ensure the safety of the public, and it will continue to be the main aim of any new standard that we publish as well. All the evidence, and there's been a huge amount that's been published, has been submitted to the Health and Safety Executive. They've been assessing that, they've been undertaking an impact assessment as well. All the work we've done is available on the IGEM website. I understand next week I'm going to be hearing the result of that impact assessment as well. So fingers crossed we should be moving forward with the changes and the implementation of the new standard next year. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay. Sort of conscious on time here, so I'll sort of rapidly just mention the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre. Again, big thanks to Sarah Ellis Manning, who's managed this brilliantly well to sort of roll out this new website, which has been created to share knowledge around all the different projects that's come together, not just in the UK, but worldwide as well. There's an incredible amount of resources in there. It's been developed through seed funding from the Barnwell Bays and Energy and Industrial Strategy, and we're grateful for their funding and also for the ongoing funding support from the gas networks. Just some of the dimensions in there as well. It's incredible. Since we launched it, we've got on average 2,500 visits to the website every month. Some over 300, nearly 350 downloads each month. It's got a number of hydrogen resources there, over 2,700 in there, and there's some 8,000 esteemed authors in there as well. If you're interested to connect with IGEM and collaborate on the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre with any of your projects, please do so. Contact us on that email address. Now, finally, just looking forward, I'm just conscious again of time. Next slide, please, Kevin. We'll do more work on these standards. We've got another incredible programme developed for next year. 3 new standards for the below 7 bar for hydrogen blends, a new standard for below 7 bar assets, a repurpose standard for below 7 bar assets as well. We'll be bringing up the SR25 hazardous area assessment. It's a huge detailed report comes with that, some 250 pages of it, and a new proposal we're working on to develop the SR23 and SR29, which deals with emergency response. Next slide, please, Kevin. And finally, just touching on policies. We're looking to finalise a policy on hydrogen and a new policy paper coming out. We've been discussing today with the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre, with the National Engineering Policy Centre at the Royal Academy, their hydrogen paper, which is about to be published. Incredible document. Consultation on the Scottish Government's Hydrogen Action Plan, as well as the consultation on hydrogen-ready boils. Fingers crossed that comes out, because that's to be done for 2026. Being launched at an event online on Friday is a new document, Policy Connect report, which is called Connecting the What's, the case for a Net Zero Delivery Authority. This is a cross-party parliamentary report which sets out a new approach to net zero, a joined-up coordinated approach that connects central and local, people to policymakers, and the UK to its net zero energy future. Its recommendations point towards changes across the heating, power, transport and industrial sectors, and set out how a net zero authority would provide delivery leadership across governance, skills and standards, public engagement and business models. Please visit the website for more details on the Policy and Research Hub. Thank you, everybody. You don't need to show that slide. We'll go for questions now. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, apologies for running a little bit behind. We had to start a bit late because there were literally hundreds of people trying to join us. So please do excuse us. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Thank you for putting them in the chat. Didn't need any encouragement there, which was great. We did have a few around the future of home heating and the role of hydrogen in heating. So one of them was from Richard Gee on the use of hydrogen directly in combusting. So that's with like the hydrogen boilers that have been developed through Hy4Heat, or as a combination for heat and power with fuel cells. Christian also provided some comment on this, and particularly around the use of hydrogen for new homes. So not just retrofit, but new homes as well. And I've certainly been having conversations around hydrogen for new home developments as well recently. And also I've noticed there was a question that came in a little bit later on hydrogen in the home as well, just that there wasn't a great deal of coverage on that. If you could both provide a quick comment on that, and then we'll go on to some of the questions.
Do you want to go first, Tom?
Sure, thanks, Ian. And thanks for the questions. I think at this stage, it's important to keep options open. So would support work, as you say, Ollie, that's been demonstrated in the BASE Hy4Heat programme, that the network trials taking place in the next few years will further produce evidence on in terms of use of directly combusting hydrogen for heat in homes. But hydrogen fuel cells might provide an answer for properties that are off gas grid. So important to keep pursuing both opportunities. Likewise with new residential developments, I think clearly there's a case for high energy efficiency properties to have a technology such as a heat network or a heat pump that can really provide good quality heat for them. But equally, let's not discount the role of hydrogen in future homes development, especially if they're, where these developments are planned, are very close to an existing gas network. I think that's an option that should be looked into. So I think I would welcome further reports on the cost of these different technologies, the benefits of these different technologies, and I think that needs to be folded into BASE's thinking and to local authorities' thinking, and indeed planning developments and industries thinking about what options are best for today and for longer term.
Thanks, Tom.
I agree with everything Tom just said there. To achieve net zero, we do recognise that that you're going to need a patchwork of different solutions and different heating solutions, and in particular when it comes to the rollout of hydrogen and where hydrogen fits within the future energy systems. Tom touched on those industrial clusters, and right to sort of look at that as the part of the gateway through to hydrogen being used in homes is the fact that at those industrial clusters you're going to create the production capability and storage of hydrogen. One or in those areas you've got them connected to a hydrogen grid and use them on that basis. Other alternative, other fuels in other areas, absolutely right. Keep our options open in terms of the role of fuel cells, particularly heat pumps. The other factor on heat pumps is also the building stock issue. And in particular, it's not just heat pumps alone, heating homes using electricity. Again, certain building stocks perhaps not lending themselves too well. I think there was a similar report which talked about 56% of existing UK stock not suitable for that as well. One thing I want to underpin all this as well is which has become quite relevant recently, is the question. We talk a lot of climate change, and we need to be ramping up more of the conversations as well around climate adaptation and resilience in our energy system as well, which is why it's going to be quite vital as we look to decarbonise, that we still decarbonise with a resilient system as well. That we know that there's still some thousands of homes in the north of the country which are still off heating right now. And those are the sort of things that through climate adaptation, those types of things are just going to get worse. So whatever we build back, we need to build it better and more resilient. And that includes the systems that we're going to be using, whether it's electricity, new hydrogen networks, combination of all.
Thanks, Ian. And that actually just came up in the questions from Richard Hewitt regarding the recent issues on the electricity network and reliance and resilience in the face of the challenges that have been this last week, and we're getting another storm tomorrow. Also, Martin Lord mentioned around some of the the difficulties and benefits of different ways of deploying future heating technology for net zero, which Chris Clark quickly commented on around the role of hybrid heating can play in there to help optimize for the benefits of both worlds. But Chris also did mention in a question further up, and one for Tom here. The CCC said last week that current targets are insufficient to meet net zero. Can the ENA speed up some of the actions to meet the required ambition, and especially the 6th carbon budget?
It's a good question, Chris. I think yes is the answer, and it requires the projects that are planned to produce the learnings they need to produce, and then for the sort of implementation really to be moved to. I think there's recognition amongst all of the network companies that we still need to provide more evidence, but if we are to bring forward the commitments that we have, it is going to require that sort of pivot towards more implementation. I think we're getting to that stage on hydrogen blending, and the networks within the next year, 18 months, I think will be ready to meet that challenge of having provided to government all the technical information to support their decision on introducing a hydrogen blend. I think still some way to go on substantiating that 100% hydrogen is what consumers want. And to be fair, I think that's a challenge that alternative net zero technologies also need to do more on, to engage people in terms of that consumer awareness and consumer acceptance. And I think the other challenge, which perhaps isn't really networks, but I think it's important, we haven't really touched on it much, is production. So it's great that the government does have that 1 gigawatt target of hydrogen production by 2025 and 5 gigawatts by 2030. But as we put in our communications out around the time over the last year or so, as the government put out that target, we think that needs to be doubled at least to get sorts of volumes of hydrogen into the system that will really begin to make a difference. So yes, we need to do more, but I don't think it's just networks. I think it's upstream and downstream of the networks as well.
Thanks, Tom. The 6th carbon budget, I think, lays bare how difficult it is, whatever solution you throw at it. And we're certainly not in the position at the moment to be able to do nothing. We've got to take action. But from what I can see, we can be getting on with lots of things without being overly concerned about the end capacities by 2050. So I'd encourage working together will help get things done more quickly. But yeah, thanks for your answer. A question of challenge. By the way, we've now reached 3:01, but there's some really good questions if you want to hang on and are able to hang on, particularly the speakers, if you are able to just answer a few more if possible. So if you are able to carry on with us, then we'll just stay on for another 5 or so minutes, and that will benefit those who are getting the video sent round afterwards. So Abigail sent us a question of challenge, I think, here. I think we've met each other on Twitter, but not in person before. Nice to hear from you. How would you respond to the numerous studies which have said that the operating costs for hydrogen for domestic heating will be considerably higher than heat pumps? Now, I'll come in with a little bit here, but by all means follow up Ian and Tom if you like. I guess I first suggest that we can get studies that come from various directions with various degrees of bias, but what's helpful, I think, is the Imperial College analysis that's shown that suggested otherwise, that most cost-effective when they've done work on the most cost-effective pathways to decarbonised heat. But the UK government, if you're not aware, are co-leading a mission with the EU, USA, Chile and Australia, alongside many other countries around the world, to achieve a cost of 2 kilograms for hydrogen. It's an end-to-end delivered cost by 2030, which is roughly speaking, crudely speaking, 4.5 pence a kilowatt hour. But I think what is key is the real supply and demand profiles that are being worked with. So being honest about those profiles and how much storage is needed and what's the benefit of looking across all the demand sectors together. With electrification, although being able to present efficiency benefits, there needs to be consideration of the asset investment and utilization across that system and the storage, of course, which is where it runs into difficulty and cost issues. But as I say, nothing is easy, but when articulating, as was mentioned before by the speakers, the industrial clusters and the development and scaling of hydrogen production, there's 42% of domestic heat in easy reach of those industrial clusters and 39% of HGV registrations. And so the benefit is there to share that supply that comes early for industry with other demand sectors. I don't know if you want to build on that at all, either of you, before we move on to another question.
I think you've answered it pretty well, Ollie, to be honest. I think first of all, on the question about sort of costs and efficiencies, there are, as you said, there's conflicting stories and conflicting evidence to prove or otherwise. One vector against the next. I don't think those conversations, if I'm entirely honest, this is just in my opinion, I don't find those conversations particularly helpful at that point. I think at this stage, I think we've got to prove these technologies that they can be done, they can be delivered. And I think there's so many more uncertainties around some of these that we haven't quite explored. The cost of retrofit, there's a disruption cost of some of these technologies as well. We need to bring that in line as well. We need to make sure that whatever transition we move to and how we move together, and we need both technologies. It's not an either or for me, that it's done in a way that minimises the cost impact of the consumers. It's absolutely critical that we have both technologies working together, minimising those cost implications, fuel poverty, making sure that doesn't get any worse at all. In fact, we've got to eradicate the concept of fuel poverty in my mind. So yeah, challenges ahead. Costs are efficiencies. One could argue about the stated efficiencies of some of these technologies, particularly the COPs that are being described. How efficient are they on a very cold winter's day as well in terms of the operation of the heat pump? Perhaps working harder, perhaps when the costs of electricity 3 and 4 times what it is for gas as well just now. So we start thinking about trying to compare efficiencies and life cycle costs of different technologies. Yeah, there are so many competing factors.
Yeah, and then those days, that's when the electricity system needs to have that extra capacity when those efficiencies are poorer. So,
just to finish off, we need a whole system solution here as well, because the two systems are incredibly inextricably linked as well. The electricity coming from in those cold winter days, where does that, how's the generation of that coming from as well? So what is that interlink between a whole systems approach, between the two vectors, but also through the different transport, production, and industrial use as well? Those things have got to be looked at in the round, non-isolation for me.
And we've had 35 days straight this year with very low or no wind, and 19 days straight, which was the same but in the heating season in April, which is a significant challenge to consider when designing the future system. Just quickly on to Tom here, just quickly mentioning nuclear from Shirley, not being on your list of resources, Tom. Do you see a role for it going forward? I see that. I think there's a role for it in adding extra value to hydrogen, particularly, but interested in how you can respond to Shirley on that.
I think certainly in respect of hydrogen, it's something that we're considering. I think what we're trying to do in the Gas Goes Green work, Shirley, is not sort of determine what we think is the best view, but respond to and ensure that the gas networks and indeed the electricity networks can support that energy transition. So if there is a continuing role and new nuclear built out over the next couple of decades, then we need to make sure that there is electricity transmission lines going to wherever those stations are built. But likewise, linking up, picking up the whole systems point, linking up those power stations with those nuclear stations with hydrogen to support and close the loop on that whole system. So I think not discounting. It's not our place to do this. We're not trying to develop scenarios. That's for the government to do. We're looking to make sure the system is there to support energy users and energy producers.
Thank you, Tom. Abigail came back on resilience. Hydrogen boilers still don't work without electricity, though. That's true, yeah, and they rely on the pumps and getting started. But what they can do is take a great deal of the demand off the electricity system at those times of stress, so that it's more able to meet the needs across the system of demand. Nathan Rod asked a good question around GDNs. Are they going to get a boost in REPEX to be hydrogen ready? As far as I've been able to tell, with the mains replacement programme, the risk reduction programme finishing around 2032. There are perhaps some little mop-up mains replacement to be doing up until around 2035, 2036 or so. But there is a link there with skills and generating the next generation of engineers for the sector. Have you got a response for that, either of you?
I'll start, Ian. I think really welcome the question and agree. I think the work on the network assets should largely be done in the next decade or so. But what's probably more urgent is that we identify what the skills need will be and begin to put in place the necessary training and certification to enable that future generation of engineers to know what it is they need to know, and then to begin to learn that so that they are in place to facilitate any conversion. Now, whether that's a wholesale conversion of the gas network or parts of the gas network being converted, either way, there will be that expertise required. And it's expertise, I think, that is a commodity that we can export to other countries looking at hydrogen.
I'd agree with that, Tom. Just add as well the investment that we need to make and the skills that we know now, but also the skills and innovation that we need to look at. Particularly, we start looking at production of green hydrogen, where we can start skills and innovate in those different electrolyzers and solutions that are going to be done. There's just one example of the technologies that we need now, and the technologies we're going to need in 2030, 2035. We need to be investing now and developing those skills. We've got an incredibly challenging skills market, we know, and to attract people to the sector, incredibly challenging as well. So we need some of those really investments driven to that area. I feel like you just said that, Tom.
Just a couple more questions. We've actually not dropped off too many of the attendees, but we will need to wrap up in a moment. I won't be able to cover all the questions, but thank you for keeping them coming through. They will be looked at, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Earlier on in the chat, Dane Wadsworth he asked a question around. You'd be interested to know what international standards are used to calculate the roadmap to net zero. And just giving reference to a couple used at the firm he's at. Ian may have a comment on international standards on hydrogen, but I did wonder, Dane, if you were referring to standards to consistently calculate progress against carbon emission targets, which is, I think, where COP comes in, and with international bodies like the International Energy Agency to track this. We, of course, have the CCC to map the pathway, or map a pathway as advice to government. Other pathways also available, and each country will need to secure themselves reliable advice to make policy that meets their needs and resource opportunities. But didn't know if you wanted to come in there, Ian, on international standards?
There's a huge amount of work going on international standards. Currently, we're working with colleagues in the CEN, the European working groups, that are, again, faced with this challenge and what they're doing to create the standards for the countries that they're also working with as well. So GERJ, one of the key partners that we have within the Hydrogen Committee, present on the projects and the exhaustive projects that they've got going on in Europe right now, investigating hydrogen, the role of hydrogen, the hydrogen in the existing infrastructure, the creation of this hydrogen transmission backbone as well across Europe. There's a huge amount of work on standards development going on right now, including some parallel work creating a standard for hydrogen in Europe as well, similar to the work that we're undertaking to look at what it can be within the UK. But I suspect it's probably more on this, uniform calculation for how we're achieving that across. I think it's probably more what the question I was looking at.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Just a quick cheeky question from myself, perhaps more for you, Tom. We've got the government's plan for demonstrators for hydrogen, as you've explained in your slides in your presentation. But does it need an update in the thinking behind it and what happens next? And my thinking around that to pose to you is, what about having organic growth of multiple villages into towns rather than having a village and then stopping and then doing a town? Is now a good time to start thinking about, with hydrogen village proposals coming in very soon, the opportunity to look at it differently?
So I think it's probably something we need to keep an eye on and see, and this sort of picks up the point Chris mentioned about ratcheting up that ambition from the networks. but also the point I made in response to that about needing production. So we can plan lots of uses of low carbon hydrogen, but we need that low carbon hydrogen being guaranteed and that to build that confidence that it's going to be there to enable any trial to receive a low carbon hydrogen. So that would be my suggestion, that let's be open to that. Let's be open to increasing the amount of trials and sort of turning some of those trials into pilots, into the first conversions, and doing that in more than one location to balance risk, but also to actually reduce some emissions as we go. But let's just keep an eye on what's possible within the hydrogen production that we have.
Thank you, Tom. I think we're almost there now, but if any of you are pro hydrogen, I expect quite a few of you are. Some of you are certainly a little skeptical, and some are probably in the space of wanting to just know more. As we mentioned before, there's a Hydrogen Knowledge Centre. Please do join us and get full access to that and receive the full value proposition that we have for you as a member, either individually or as an industrial affiliate. Do also go and see hydrogen homes that are there to go and have a look at, with the boilers, the hobs, the fires, cookers, all there to be able to go and explore. And that's Highgrove in the northeast of England. And there's a lot of other activity going on as well. Take a note on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc., for updates on those projects. So that concludes this session. And on behalf of the institution, I would like to thank both Ian and Tom for their excellent presentations, and everyone who's engaged with all the questions in the chat. As I say, I'm sorry we didn't get around to answering them all, but we'll do our best after this session. And for all those others who joined the call as well. Do look out for booking onto some other events that are coming up soon. Just a quick snapshot of these. The Sir Dennis Rook Memorial Lecture is on the 23rd of March in London in person, and that's with Lord Deben, the chairman of the CCC. Our gas utilisation conference on the 29th of March, and then back to an in-person gas industry awards lunch between the IGEM and Energy Utilities Alliance on the 11th of May in London. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.